What's up, guys? It's Shirley with Shirley Creates, and in this video I want to give you guys a tutorial of 25 things you must know before you start Photoshop. Let's get into it. Alright guys, so these tips and tricks are things that I use every single day when I'm working in Photoshop. They are things that you sometimes overlook. It would be the smallest thing, as far as just hitting in an enter button or just pushing a key. And it's things that I sometimes even forget. So I wanted to compile this video together for you of the 25 things plus a few bonuses that I use in Photoshop. So if you have not, consider subscribing to my channel. I'm going to be giving videos about tutorials for Photoshop. I'm also going to be doing behind the scenes of designing and printing. I'm also getting into sewing now, so if you're interested in that, and I'm going to be doing some vlogs as well. So a lot of things are going to be going on in this channel. This particular video is part of a series that is going to be all about Photoshop for beginners. So if you're interested in that, then also consider subscribing. If you do get any value, give it a thumbs up, and let's get to the video. Alright guys, so as you can see, I have a file open here, and this is my little friend Sketch. He is a character that I created for my kids clothing brand. I made this kids, and he's going to be helping us today. So everyone, this is Sketch. Alright, so first thing I want to do is show you guys how to open a file. This isn't part of the 25 steps, but I think that it is important just knowing how to not open a file, but start a new one. What you want to do is go to File, New. Okay, and the most important thing is understanding how to set the dimensions and your resolution. So right now I have the dimensions set to 8.5 by 11, which is the standard size of a piece of paper. And then you can look here and see inches. You can change this in whatever way that you want to work. I usually keep it to inches or pixels because it's the easiest way for me to measure the dimensions of a design. Now, the next thing is the resolution. This is the second most important thing, right, other than knowing the size, is your resolution. Now, for regular printing, just like printing from home, 150 is pretty standard. 72 pixels is what you would want to use like on a computer or a phone. And then 350 is standard when you are printing professionally. So if you're printing, for instance, in my case, when I print banners or flyers or business cards, I have to set that print to 350 resolution for the highest quality crisp image. Okay, so just make sure that you are paying attention to your resolution. And I would say that you always want to make it higher so that in case you do have to make it smaller, it won't pixelate on you. But if you're not sure if you're going to use something to print, if you are sure that you're not going to be printing something, then just set it to 150, and that's pretty standard. Just make sure, I'd rather be safe than sorry. So if you don't know if you're going to print it, set it higher. But if you do know that you're not, you can set it lower. I hope that makes sense. Okay. Then you would go ahead and click on, the color mode. You can, depending on who you're printing or what you're printing, you might set it to CMYK. But for now, we'll just leave it in RGB. All right. And then you would go ahead and click Create. Now this is going to go ahead and open up your file. Now I'm going to come back to Sketch because this is where I'm going to be explaining all of the features that we need to know. I want to talk about the 25 tips and tricks that everyone should know before they start Photoshop because it will save you a lot of headache. These are things that I learned just from getting started in Photoshop and then learning along the way, and it would have saved me so much time. I had to look through all these videos and just kind of experimenting with Photoshop itself. So I am going to explain these things, and I hope that you get some value. So let's go ahead and jump in. The first thing I want to talk about, and the most important, is layers and how to understand them. So Photoshop is a software that works with layers, which basically means that these here are layers, and you can put objects on top of each other, right? So on some programs, for instance, let's just use Paint. Paint is a flat software. If you paint something onto the actual, background, then what you will see, that's the eraser tool. Bam, here we go. So if I were to paint on here, basically the way it would work is this paintbrush would color over sketch, but because Photoshop is a layer-based program, I can do this without having to worry about coloring over him like as if it was a piece of paper, okay, because there's no layers. But because there are layers, I'm actually coloring underneath sketch, and you can see here that I am on the bottommost layer. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and delete that. Let me come in my history and get rid of that. Go back to the open. So here is an extra bonus tip. You can either use Control Z to go back, but in Photoshop, Control Z only lets you go back once. So you can open up your window and then you go to history and then you can go back further, right? There's a limit. I think it's 25 steps, but this is an actual bonus tip. Anyway, so the very first thing that I want to explain is how layers work. So basically, I'm going to kind of use an analogy that makes sense to me, and I hope it makes sense to you, but I see Photoshop the layers as if it was a sandwich, okay? So if you look here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 layers, and this top layer is our bun. It is the topmost bun. It is what you will see on top. Then we have our lettuce, tomato, and cheese, or whatever else that you want to fill your sandwich with, right? And then, of course, we have the bottom bun. Now, the bottom bun, or the bottom layer, is always going to be your base layer, okay? And then, of course, everything else is on top. Now, if you look here, you're going to see the eyeballs. We'll get into that in the next couple of tips, but I just want you to notice that. That just means that you can see the layer, right? It's not hidden. Now, if I was to move sketch here, now you can see what's underneath him, right? And then if you notice, whatever I've done on this screen, you can see it in your layers. So now you can see that this sketch is on the right, this one's on the left, and then this one is in the middle. So I just want you to understand that sometimes when you're working in Photoshop, you may be clicking on the actual screen here, but it may not be editing because you're not clicked on the right layer and you can't see it. So I just kind of wanted to briefly explain that, and then we'll start with that base, okay? Number 2 is, let's just say you were editing something here in Photoshop, okay? And, okay, I am sizing sketch down, right? Now, if you notice, my arrow is kind of like a curved arrow now, right? And if I was to try to click on something else, it won't let me, all right? Unless, let me just cancel that. If I was to click, okay, if I was to click on the screen, it's not going to let me. It's going to give me this arrow. What you have to do is you can either click enter, okay, and basically what that does is it tells Photoshop that the command is done, that you have moved on, because if not, you will drive yourself crazy trying to click somewhere and saying, why isn't this working? Or if you don't hit enter, you can also just click on another tool. Okay, and when that happens, this is going to appear. It's going to ask you to apply the transformation. You want to click apply, and then it lets you move on to the next step. All right, that used to confuse me all the time, and it still does. Sometimes I'll forget to hit enter, or I'll forget to go to another tool. So just make sure if you do anything like sizing, and for some reason it won't let you click anywhere, remember to always hit enter. Okay, the next is renaming layers. Now this is really, really important, especially when you have, you know, in Photoshop, you can have up to 50 layers sometimes, even more than that. And it gets really confusing if you don't name your layers. Now, I did not name my layers in the beginning, and it's really, sometimes I still don't. I actually just named these layers, honestly, because I'm doing this video. So do as I say, not as I do. But you want to rename your layers, and by doing that, you just double click on the actual name, and now I can change the name here. Okay, now this is very useful. Like I said, if you're working with multiple layers and you want to remember which one is which without actually having to look at the screen, I can click here and know which layer I need to edit. So it really comes in handy. Trust me, I am telling you that it works. Okay, the next thing that you want to do to understand is how to move layers. So for instance, if I wanted, I'm just going to resize sketch here, our surprise sketch, so that he's over top of this perfectly. But if for some reason I wanted to move this sketch underneath these ones, all you have to do is you click and drag. And if you notice, there is a blue highlighted, there it is, blue highlighted line that appears. And then once you are ready to move that, you just let go. Okay, and now you can see that the smiling sketch is on top. Okay, so all you do is you click, drag, blue highlight, let go. Bam. Okay. Now you want to also know how to edit your layers. Okay, so basically, there are a ton of effects that you can do in Photoshop. I mean, there is just so much. I have no idea how much Photoshop can really do, just because I don't think anyone, maybe even the Photoshop experts, have done everything that this software has the potential of, right? There's just so many things. But anyway, one of the many of them is to edit the actual layer. So what you want to do is you want to double click. Make sure to double click on the blank space, because if you double click here, it's gonna think that you want to rename the layer. We don't want to do that. We want to open up the layer style. Okay, and what this does is this is where we can really edit our layers and make it look cool. Add drop shadows. We can do a color overlay. We can do a gradient overlay. We can do a pattern overlay, and just have a lot of fun and just kind of experiment. Okay, now one thing to remember when you are working in the layer styles is if you just click here in the check mark, it's not actually going to do anything here. Okay, you want to make sure that if you're clicking on an effect, you actually click on the blank spot, and then it will open up the options. So that's something that a lot of people forget. Even sometimes I do, that I just kind of click here and I check mark it, but I don't actually click on the blank space so that it can open up the editable options here. So just make sure to remember that. And then from here, let's just say we wanted to add a drop shadow. Let me move I moved the drop shadow. I didn't mean to do that. Let me go ahead and cancel. But let me move the sketch that we're going to edit here. And then we're just going to turn these other guys off. Bam. Double click. Double click. Okay. Now I'm going to go ahead and add a drop shadow. All right. And now I'm going to mess with the opacity. And then you can change all of these settings and you will be able to see how it looks differently. And the best way to really understand how this works is honestly just to go and play. Just to go back there and just start pressing buttons and messing with stuff. You're not going to break anything, so don't be scared to try to play around within the program. If you, for some reason, have a design and you completely screw it up, that's okay. You can just start over. As long as you don't save it, because then if you save the file and don't rename it, then there's a problem. But don't worry, we'll get into how to save it. All right, so once you've kind of played around, you can always mess with that, but that is how you get to it. Just make sure that you are double clicking to get to the layer styles. And I think there's another way to do it. There's like 10 ways to do things in Photoshop, but for me, that's the easiest way. Okay. Next thing you want to know is if you do, for some reason, make a mistake. So let's just say how I just did that there. I moved sketch. Maybe I want him back here. Control Z. That is just how you undo something. In Photoshop, you can only undo once, like I explained before. So I can only do this back and forth. But Control Z is a shortcut to edit, undo, right? So you don't have to come to File, Edit all the time. Just Control Z, which is pretty standard. Control Z is the magic undo button for every program. All right. Now the next one is shortcuts. So in Photoshop, it is very time consuming when you kind of have to come over here and click on everything. And so shortcuts really saves us time. So for instance, if I click on B, what that does is it opens up the brush tool. Okay, and now I can use the brush tool. Then I'll hit Control Z. Okay, now if I hit another shortcut, which would be I, that would open up the eyedropper tool. So shortcuts are really important. Just kind of start pressing buttons and seeing what they do. Just press different keys, like the W opened up the magic wand. The Q, to be honest, I'm not even sure what that does because I never use Q. Okay, but it's a quick mask. That's what it is. Don't be afraid to kind of press buttons and just see what happens, by pressing the different command keys. Okay, the next one is, if for some reason, so I am actually going to turn this eyeball off, which this is actually one of the tips. If you don't want to view a certain layer, you can turn this eyeball on and off. All right, guys. So if for some reason you freak out and you're like, oh my gosh, where's my design? It was here. It's probably because you have the layer turned off. That's all you have to do is just turn on the eyeball. Always make sure if for some reason something doesn't look right here, look in your layers and see what's going on, because almost 99.9% of the problem is in your layers. All right, so anyway, we're going to turn sketch off. But if you notice, I have a symbol here that basically is saying no. So what this is telling me is I cannot make any kind of edits because I have no layers turned on. So there's nothing that I can do. So what I have to do is I have to come over here and turn a layer on, right? But if you notice, I still can't do anything. Well, why is that? Well, if you look here, this layer is actually a vector. Okay, it's a smart object, which a smart object is if you're using programs like Adobe Illustrator or any other kinds of programs that are allowing you to import images into Photoshop, this is what happens basically when it's not a rasterized file. Okay, and to be honest, I don't know the technical term for raster and vector, but what I do know is that if this is a vector image, you're going to get this sign, and if it's a rasterized image, you won't. So what we want to do is anytime you see this smart object and you want to, let's say, paint on sketch, you would right click and you would go to rasterize layer. And now you have made this layer editable. And then if you notice, that little smart object icon is gone and we can now paint on sketch. All right, so the next thing is the importance of the eyedropper tool. Now, the eyedropper tool is awesome because basically what it does is it just kind of, if you notice, actually, let me go back here. Oh, let me go back again. So if you notice, this square here is the color that it is allowing us to use. And if I use the eyedropper tool, it's going to suck up any color that I click on. Okay, so if for some reason, let's turn this layer on here. Let's say we wanted to do a color overlay on sketch, and we wanted, what you would do first is you click on this color here, but we wanted this black, right? We would just use the eyedropper tool and it would allow that color to be replicated exactly. Okay, now another cool thing to know is if for some reason this happens, you wanted to copy the code of this color, you can actually come here and now you can just Control C, which is copy, or you can left click, copy. Now you have this code that you can use instead of using the eyedropper tool. So basically the same technique, or I mean, sorry, the same result, but you're using a different technique. So I do the color overlay again. And now, instead of using the eyedropper tool like this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste that same code here. So I am achieving the same result of the eyedropper tool, but instead of using the eyedropper tool, I am copying the code. And in some instances, you will see when that is handy, and that's just going to come with experimenting with Photoshop. So I just wanted to show you two ways of how to do that. All right, the next thing is how to create a new layer and also how to fill that layer with a solid color. So let's just say I wanted a green background for sketch. The easiest way to do that is you come down to the bottom layer, which is our bun. So to create a new layer, you would click on this paper button right here, and now, bam, our new layer is there. Okay, or you could go to File. I think it's, no, I'm sorry, not File, but you come here, left click. Never mind. That's the only way I know how to do it. Just click on this button right here and it makes a new layer. All right. Now, if we wanted to fill this layer in with a color, there's a shortcut that you can do, which is Alt Backspace. Basically, what that does is whatever color is on your background, it will use that as the full background to the new layer. Or if you wanted to make it white, you would click Control backspace, and then it will make it your foreground color. So for instance, let's just use another example. I want a green background for sketch. So what I'll do is make this color here green, and then it's going to change this layer to green. Alt backspace. Bam. So it uses the color that I have here and then creates it into a solid background. This comes in handy instead of having to double click and then go to color overlay, and doing all of those steps is just a shortcut if you want a solid color. Okay, now the next one is how to make a copy of a layer. So instead of creating a new layer like we did, if I just want to make a copy of this, I can click Control J. Oh, I didn't click. Hit Enter. Control J. Oh, Control, not Alt. So when I click Control J, that basically makes a copy of the layer. So if you notice, it says Layer 1 Copy, and Control J allowed us to do that. Instead of clicking a new layer, we just copied it. So this would come in handy, for instance, if I needed another layer of sketch with the smiling teeth like this. Obviously, I would not be able to just make a new layer. I would have to make that specific layer over again with him. So I would click on Control J, and now I have two of him. Okay, and then if you notice, you see the copy there. Okay, now we've discussed turning on and off the eyeball. And then the next thing is dragging from Illustrator to Photoshop. So Adobe is pretty awesome because if I have a design in Illustrator, the Adobe softwares pretty much communicate with each other. So I actually got Sketch from an Illustrator file that I created, and I just dragged him over into my Photoshop file. So the way that works is when you have a file in Illustrator, you simply grab that file, drag, and if you notice, there's a plus sign right here next to my arrow or below my arrow, and then I can let it go, and it will now drag that and drop it into Adobe Photoshop. Okay, now if you wanted to add text, there's a shortcut, T for text, and what that does is you'll see that text icon appear, and now you can start typing on your layers. Okay, and then you can position that wherever it is that you need. Also, another bonus tip is if for some reason, let's just say hello, ... Sometimes I'll notice in Photoshop that this ... will actually be on the opposite side. I'm not sure what the reasoning is, but the way to fix that is you go to Type, and then you go to Language Options, and usually what should be selected is Middle Eastern features, and then you would click on Left to Right Character Direction. But it's actually set properly, so I haven't had any issues with it recently, but I did, and I remember I was going crazy trying to figure it out, looking for different videos on YouTube to show me what was wrong. And so just to kind of save you headache, if that happens to you, always make sure you go to Type, Language Options, and then just reset that left to right character direction. All right. The next is copying something on the screen using Control and drag. So the same way, I'm just going to delete this layer. Also, another bonus tip is if you hit delete, you can actually delete the layer entirely instead of having to come here and click on the trash can button. Just hit the backspace button on your keyboard. All right, but if you wanted to make another sketch, let's just delete him there. Instead of me having to come and hit Control J like we had, I can actually hold down Alt and then drag. And then what that does is it's the same result again in Photoshop. It's just a different way to do it. So like I said, in Photoshop, there are at least 10 ways to do the same exact thing. And it's just a different way to do it because Photoshop is made for all kinds of learners. I think it's a really awesome capability that Photoshop has. There's no right or wrong way to really do it. You know, there's 10 ways to skin a cat, basically. All right, on the next thing that we need to learn is how to use the magic wand as a paint bucket, right? So if we wanted, for instance, to fill Sketch's eye and make it green, let's just use that example, I would click with the magic wand on the color that I wanted to turn green, and I would hit Alt backspace. I'm sorry, not Alt backspace. I would hit, yeah, it would. Why isn't it working? Wait a second. Oh, it wasn't working because I'm clicked on the vector image. So let's go ahead and turn that off. And I'm going to click on the rasterized image just to make it easier. So now I click in his eye, and then I hit Alt backspace. And what that does is it acts as like the paint bucket tool. Okay, so that's just a quick little shortcut that if you wanted to make it green, you can do that, kind of like the paint feature in the paint software. All right, now let's just go back, history. Let's go back a couple spaces. The next tip is how to deselect. So if you wanted to get rid of these dancing ants, what you would want to do is click Control D, and now that those dancing ants disappear. I know sometimes I used to go crazy trying to figure that out, but that's just a quick shortcut. Okay, the next is making a copy from the magic wand. So again, if you, instead of coloring this in with color, if you wanted to just make a copy of this selection, kind of like making a new layer, you would click Control J. And then if you notice here, we can now see that we were able to make a copy of just this. All right. So our magic wand has many different capabilities, and that is just a couple of them. The next one is how to remove a background with the magic wand. So let's just say, for instance, we wanted to remove, I'm going to open up another image here, and let me pick one that, let me pick this one. All right, so if I wanted to remove this magenta, I could actually click on that and then hit delete, right? So I'll click on this, the background, and then I can hit select similar. And now it will delete all of the similar colors. Again, I would click with my magic wand, go to select similar, and now I just got rid of the entire background. Okay, so that is just, and then as you can see, I moved that layer because it was on top and it was covering my pencil there. But yeah, if you wanted to delete a background, again, you can just click, or not that layer, you can click on the background and then get rid of it. Okay. The next one is changing the opacity. So let's go back to sketch here. If I wanted to change the opacity for some reason, I can just click on the opacity here, and now you can see turning it up or down allows me to change the opacity on sketch. All right, guys, and last but certainly not least is how to save your file. Once you've done, and actually you should save periodically. You should definitely be saving your project in between edits, but I just want to show you in the end of this video how to save a file. So you want to go to File, Save As, and then from here, just make sure you're choosing your type. Okay, so if you're saving as a PSD file, which is a Photoshop file, that's fine. You can change it to JPEG, PDF, PNG. There's all kinds of files here. And then, of course, you would rename it as you need it and put it in the folder that you need it in. Okay, so very, very simple, guys. I hope that you got a lot of value out of this video. Also, this is part of a series of videos that I'm creating for Photoshop. If you're just getting started in Photoshop, so make sure to check those out. All right, guys, so I hope that you got a lot of value out of this video. Like I said, a lot of these things are just simple things that we overlook, or just things that, if you wouldn't have heard it or seen it, you probably wouldn't have known, especially like the shortcut keys. It's just kind of things that you pick up while you work in Photoshop. And it literally, some of the things that I talk about took me years to find out, just from, scrolling through videos on YouTube or just kind of experimenting with it myself. So I hope that you got some value. Go ahead and leave me a comment if you have any kinds of questions, or maybe you're working on something. Let me know. Also, if, like I said, if you think that you got any value from this video, then consider subscribing. I'm going to be creating more videos like this. And this is going to be part of a series for Photoshop for beginners. All right, guys, so thanks again. I will see you on the next one. Be bold, be passionate, be you. Take care.